The next step is injecting our caulking between the breast skin and the form. We're going to be doing that on the breast area through our head entry point, or our neck area, which is right here. To do that, we have to attach tubing. This is 1/2 inch flexible tubing to our caulk. In this case, this is silicone caulk, and this is latex caulk. And I'll show you how to set that up in a second, but before we set it up, I want to go over the kind of caulking we're going to be using in the breast feather area. What I normally use here for everything is 100% silicone. You want to get name brand silicone. That's the best. Avoid store brands. Silicone is excellent. It shoots through that hosing nicely. The biggest problem with it is short work time. You have about a 20-minute to a half an hour work time once you inject it between the skin and the form. If you're just starting out, that may not be the best bet for the breast feather area. I'm still going to recommend this even if you're just starting out for the hackle feathers. It goes a little bit faster, and you definitely want that faster setup time on the hackle feathers. But because I'm doing this for beginners as well as for seasoned pros, I'm going to recommend acrylic latex caulk. Now this says plus silicone. That doesn't mean it's going to cure out as quickly as silicone. They just have that mixed in with this. It's difficult to get clear latex. You can get it where it dries clear, but normally it always comes out white. Always recommend going with clear silicone. You can't really get clear latex. At least I haven't been able to find any good clear latex, so you have to live with the white. If you get a little bit on the feathers while you're injecting, leave it alone, come back in a few days and just pull it off. The work time on latex is about 2 to 3 weeks, especially for shingling. The skin's going to dry out before this stuff dries out. So if you're going to be shingling, I would always use this. I even use this if I'm going to shingle the breast feathers or vent them or lift them up. We'll be going over that when we get to that point, which is the last step. But if you use the latex in the breast feathers, you're going to have a lot of work time to get everything groomed out. You're not going to be stressed or rushed. So definitely use this to start. I have a number of caulking guns here. Because we're shooting this through this hosing, you need to make sure you're using a ratchet type gun. And you want to have one with deep splines in it like this. You can get this at hardware stores, home improvement stores. You want to buy the best model you can find. Unfortunately, a lot of these newer models break relatively easily. If you're just shooting latex, it'll probably work. Silicone's a little bit harder to push through. If you were going to try to push a construction adhesive through, this would not cut it at all. If you're lucky enough to have one of these older type caulking guns, this can push anything through. You can get these at garage sales, flea markets, thrift stores, maybe even Grandpa's old toolbox if you're lucky enough. But if you can get a hold of one of these, get one of these. They actually cost less than these, and they're a lot better. They just don't make them as good anymore. You don't have to have this if you can afford it or you want to invest in it. This is a cordless caulking gun. This will muscle anything through that tubing. You could shoot construction adhesive through there all day. What's nice about this is when you start it out and you let off, it automatically backs off. So if you're in here doing your injecting and you want to stop, you just pull off the trigger and you won't have any more of your caulking continuing to come out and potentially getting on the feather. You don't have to worry about it. Also gives you a very nice even flow as you're working with it. You're not thinking about having to crank on that gun. I'm going to be using the ratchet gun for the breast feathers to show you that, because that's most likely what you're going to be using. But I'm going to use this with silicone on the hackle just to show you what you can do with it. Also, if you do have one of these, you can adjust back here for your rate of flow. I like to be at a midpoint towards a fairly heavy flow. I'll just show you what kind of a flow you want to have with it. Again, however fast your flow is, how fast you need to be moving. So as you're working back along that hackle, you want to be going about like this. A little back off is nice again. You see how I have it taped here? This whole thing swivels when you get it in. You don't want this thing swiveling. When you have it in here, you want complete control of where that hose is going to be. So I tape that off. As you can see, obviously this is a DeWalt model. This is a super heavy duty model. Costs around $300. You can get other models that cost less that would work for this as well. You could probably get something for around 150 that would do the job. One of the big questions I'm asked all the time with turkeys is, how much of this do you inject in here between the skin and the form? How much caulking do you put in there? The truth is not that much. It's only acting as an adhesive and as a means of feather control. We're not trying to fill up anything with this, anywhere on this bird. It's just adhesive and feather control. So the breast feather area on a 20-pound turkey like this, if you're using latex, you might use up a full tube. I'm probably going to use up about 3/4 of a tube through this entire area here. I will be putting a small amount of silicone at the head attachment point because I want that to cure out faster, and we'll go over that when we do it. But just to give you an idea, one of these should be more than enough for the entire breast feather area on a turkey. You're just putting a thin coating there. This is the flexible tubing. We're going to be cutting off about roughly 12-inch piece. That's what I use for doing all my injection work. Because we're using two kinds of caulking, we'll actually be cutting two of these, one for the silicone and one for the latex. You can reuse these. As long as it doesn't cure out in the tube, you can keep reusing them and reusing them. I've had some tubes where I've literally used one of these tubes and mounted 100 turkeys with it. As long as that silicone doesn't cure out into it, you can keep reusing it. We have it cut, but you can see here that it has the memory of being on the roll. And we want to get rid of that. We want this to loosen up. So when we push it in here, we're not dealing with this curve. To do that, we use a heat gun. We're just going to heat it up from underneath until it falls forward. This is a heat gun that you use for shrink wrapping. You don't necessarily have to have one this powerful, but it makes short work of this. I have it turned all the way up to about 300 degrees. After I have it heated up, you can see I have it almost straight. I like to set it on my workbench, push it against anything flat, and then put a little weight against it. And a little shim, and let that cool right like that. Our 1/2-inch tubing is cooled. The next step is we have to bevel one of the edges. When we're pushing it in, you don't want a sharp edge. It'll catch on the skin and the feather quills. We do that on the grinder. We're just rounding off the edges here. Now we need to prepare our tube of latex caulking for the injection process, including putting it into our caulking gun. First step is obviously just nip off the end of it like you normally would when you're using caulking. Like to straighten it out a little bit. You want to cut a fairly big area off. You want a lot of flow coming out of it. Take a piece of wire, just break it open. They have a seal, some do, some don't. Obviously this does not want to get on here. So you want to use extra caution as we're moving forward. Now we're going to load this up into the caulking gun. Just push this forward. We'll take our tubing and we're just going to slide that right over the top. You want to push it on as far as you can, forcing that on there. And we'll take a T-pin and we're going to push it through. What this does is this locks that tubing in place so it can't come off. The last thing you want is when you're injecting for the tubing to come off and you start squirting your caulking all over the bird. Not a good idea. Okay, then we just nip our T-pin off like that. You don't want that pin sticking out like you're caught on our feathers. The next step is to take some electrical tape and we're just going to tape that around our wires. Most caulking guns will have the whole body under here. You would just tape it around the same way. This just stops it from moving. Also, because this is an older style caulking gun, I'm going to put a little bit of electrical tape right around these splines that are on the back side of it to help hold it in place. I don't want it moving on me when I'm working. Now we test it out. Make sure it's flowing through the tube correctly. See that it is. And you also make sure there's no leaks anywhere here, and we don't have anything leaking. So that's very important. You look for that. When we're in the bird and we're caulking and you want to stop, you'll have to lift your other hand up and turn it like this to stop that flow. If you're using the cordless model, that'll do it automatically. But this model will work great for that. We're ready to start injecting our caulking. The first thing I like to do is grab the bird by its neck feathers. Make sure this is still moist yet. We want to make sure this is still wet. Very important. I lift it up like this. Shake it a little bit. That helps to realign those feathers. Make sure all my skin is loose everywhere. I look at it from this direction, head on, and I make sure my scapular groups and my hackle feathers are all lining up correctly. I don't want anything misaligned at this point. I always like to inject first on the best side of the bird. It's easier to inject on one side versus going and doing the other side after one side's injected. You have a little bit more room and the feathers just fall nicer on the one side. So we're going to be injecting on the left side of the bird first, which is this side, or the camera side. It's also a good idea to have some of your powdered borax nearby if you feel you're going to be getting any of your caulking on the feathers, like when you're pulling it out of the neck area. If you have a little bit of that on the feathers, that'll protect them and you can just peel it right away. You have to be very careful when you're injecting that you do not get any of your caulking, whether it's silicone or latex, it doesn't matter, on these neck feathers or any of the other feathers. You really want to think about what you're doing. I also have gloves on when I do this step. If I do get any latex or silicone caulk on my hands, I can quickly take the glove off, grab another glove, and keep working. Also, if there's any holes in your breast feather, especially if they're bigger holes, some of that caulking could shoot out of those holes. Also, when you have your tube down in here injecting, the tube likes to find those holes and press out of it. You want to make sure that the tube is not coming out of any of those holes, or you'll start shooting your caulking all over these feathers, which wouldn't be a good thing for obvious reasons. So to start, with my left hand, I'm lifting up on these neck feathers and just pulling it up. I'm going to put the tube in right down to the shoulder. So I'm right where the scapular groups are starting. And I kind of can feel it with my hand where I'm at. And you'll see me doing this throughout this process. I'm going to shoot a little bit out, just make sure it comes out. And it is. That's going to give me a little bit of lubrication to get this tubing the rest of the way down. So I'm coming from down around by the shoulder, and I'm just moving down towards the bottom of the breast feathers. I'm not injecting anything right now. I want to get all the way down to where the breast feathers stop, and then I can inject, and then I'll move back up injecting. That's important. So I'm feeling with my hand under here for when the tube comes down to where the breast feathers start. So right now my tube is right down here where the breast feathers start. I can feel where it is. I'm going to start to inject. I'm just going to put out a steady stream. And as I'm working that, I'm keeping pressure on it, keeping injecting, and I'm just moving this way. And I'm going to move up in this pattern all the way up, back up to the top. Making sure I have adequate coverage. You do not need 100% coverage at this point. That'll be accomplished when we taxi our skin into place. But right now I just want to get the entire thing injected with the beads running like this. So I came all the way over to where the beard is. I'm about 4 inches to 5 inches underneath the beard, and I'm just keeping injecting, and I'm just stepping it back, working it back. Okay, now I'm about where the beard is, injecting and moving up. Again, you want to keep watching, make sure you don't have it coming out anywhere. Now I'm at the top of the shoulder where the scapular group starts, right here. Putting out a little bit more there. I'm going to drop down to where the beard is. So I'm right here now. Just going to inject and pull up. I'm going to swing back. I'm just going to shoot a little bit on these feathers right here, which are the cape feathers. I'm shooting something back there to hold those in place. We'll be also hitting that area with silicone, but I put a little bit there. This entire side has now been injected. Now I'll swing over and I'll do the exact same procedure on the other side. Okay, we have the other side injected, and we're just going to carefully pull our tubing out, being careful not to get any of that caulking on those feathers. I'm going to take my left hand, and where I have a little caulking right on the edge, I'm just going to get rid of that so it doesn't get on the feathers. Because I do have a little bit of that caulking in the neck area, I'm going to take a little bit of borax, and I'm just going to spread that in there on that kills it off, so that as we're putting our head on, it's not going to accidentally get on the feathers. Just blow away any excess and let that hang down. We have our latex caulking all injected, and we have the tube pulled out. Now I have the same setup with silicone. I'm going to put just a small amount of this back here on these cape feathers, and then right at the head attachment point. That's the point where we drill the hole in for our head. The reason I use silicone there is it sets up much faster, and if I would have to put this bird on a tilt to do some shingling work later, that would keep that tight and in place. Remember, silicone, you have about a half an hour. Latex, you've got weeks to work with it. Again, I'm just lifting everything up. Push the silicone tube in. Take my left hand, which is a clean hand. You want to double check that before you touch the feathers. And I'm just going to start injecting that right at the head attachment point and at some of these feathers on the cape or pan of feathers directly behind the head. Kind of filling that area up. Okay, got plenty in there, so we just turn that. Pull it out and out of the way. And double check to make sure we don't have any extra white or our latex caulking anywhere. We don't. Now we have to realign our feathers before we put the head on. I call this clearing the way. I'm going to be putting my fingers in here and clearing the skin all the way down, the neck skin, all the way down to where our head attachment point is. So when we put our head on, we're not trapping skin behind the head or the neck part of the head in the form. You don't want to pinch skin in there. Very important. I have it all cleared away. Now I'm going to start developing the look of the turkey. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come underneath the breast feathers with my right hand. I'm just going to bring them up slightly and push them up against the form. Depending on how tight your form is, will depending on how much you push them up. I'm bringing the whole feather group slightly forward and up against the form. That is mimicking what's happening when a turkey is strutting. When a turkey is strutting, the breast expansion causes the skin from the rest of the turkey to pull up towards this area. So we just recreated that now. What we're doing is we're shaping the skin to the form. We're not letting the form necessarily dictate where the skin goes. We're pushing it to it and shaping it. Because we have injected everything, we have complete control not only of the skin but of all the feather groups. I grab the cape of feathers or pan of feathers and I just pull that up slightly. And I look at where my scapular groups are. Make sure they're fairly lined up. They should be starting right on top of the shoulders. You can feel down to where the shoulder is, and they should be pulled ahead slightly and pushed down and in. And we'll go over that a little bit more in a second. Okay, now that we have everything cleared, we're going to pull our fingers out. This can be tricky. You don't want to get any of this caulking on those feathers. Let that drop down, and we'll change our glove. We're going to put the head back on. So I take my left hand, I'm grabbing on to the back of the neck feathers. Head is in the right hand. I'm going to start by pushing the wire in and finding our hole. This can take a little bit of time. Sometimes you have to start near the top and just work your way down, feeling for it inside. Okay, we've found that. The next step is I start to get the neck skin around the neck of the head when the head is way up high. The reason I do that is I don't want to push any of our feathers down underneath while I'm shoving it on and potentially get caulking on them. I'm also making sure that the neck skin and feathers are not being trapped underneath the head as we're pushing it down. I just work it down a little bit at a time, and I keep checking and double checking that as we're pushing it down. I keep pulling this pan or cape of feathers up as I'm doing it. I want to make sure I'm not getting anything trapped. Same with underneath here. So just little bits at a time. And there, it's in place. I'm just going to shift the bird this way a little bit. Start seeing how everything's lining up. I'm going to work on our scapular group alignment now, which is this group of feathers here. They should be up and just pressed into the top of that shoulder area on that form. So they'll be looking like that when they're done. I grab the pan of feathers and I just pull it up and forward and take a look at that. We don't have any trapped skin on this side. You just want to make sure now too that this side where the scapular groups are starting is matching this side. Make sure you have that alignment correct. Sometimes it's necessary to grab on here and pull the entire breast feathers up and on to the top of that shoulder. In this case it isn't. We have such a good fit here, everything just fell into place. We don't have to do that. So right now the head's just free floating against the form and against our silicone. And that's where it's going to sit for now as we get the rest of the skin tucked in. We will be putting an eye pin in it shortly to hold it in place, but as far as attaching the head, that's all you have to do for this point. You don't have to put any big wires in here or any Bondo or hot glue. Our silicone is going to hold it in place. Now we're going to make a little device to inject some of our silicone caulking into the neck directly beneath the head. This is oxygen tubing. This is about a 3 to 4 inch piece. We're going to take a 3 cc syringe. Get rid of the needle, don't need that. Press it onto the end of it. Take a little bit of electrical tape. Just tape it on so it doesn't come off. Really important to do that. You don't want that coming off right now. Back the plunger out. This is 100% silicone. We're just going to press that up against the back and fill that syringe up as much as we can. And then we'll put our plunger back in. Push it so it's just right coming to the top. And you can use this for a lot of things in turkey work. It works really good, especially if you're doing gobbling mounts or standing mounts and flying mounts. This is really important to do this. So what we're going to do is we are going to just pull our skin down and fold our feathers back directly under the head, enough for us to get this syringe end in place. And I'm going in about 1 inch to 2 inches down. And I'm just starting to put it in, evenly coating it, not filling up there. I'm just putting some in there as an adhesive, so we have good feather control. And then we just carefully pull it out. If you get a little bit on the head, which you normally do, I just wipe that away. We'll set that aside. Now we'll tuck the skin in underneath the head. If you recall, when we were preparing the head, we had grooved out the foam underneath the head. You can see why we did that now. We have plenty of room to push our skin into place without having to fight to push it under. And by putting the silicone caulking there, we've rebuilt the fluids that are normally surrounding the neck to finish out the size of the neck. So as we were cutting that neck down, it seemed like maybe that's a little too small for a turkey neck, but really it isn't. A lot of what turkeys' necks are made up of is just that fluid surrounding the neck. You want to make sure this is lined up correctly and you're not folding any feathers underneath. It should go cleanly up underneath. and flow in really nicely. You should have an even flow. You want to make sure that the center of your bird, which is at the beard, is at the center of the major carnacle. There's always a major carnacle in the center. You want to line those up. Just pressing it up underneath as much as I realistically can at this point. This is just a little pushing tool. You can use any tool that looks similar to this to push this skin in. I like this one because it has a little bit of a curve to it on the end, so I can be at this angle here and still push it up and under. Sometimes you have to work that feathers and skin underneath these major carnacles a little bit, especially if they come down and around like this one does. Okay, now that we have that in place, I just press on it slightly, making sure all my feathers are still lining up correctly. Everything is still lined up. Again, our head is still a little loose like this, but that's okay. We're going to be adjusting that in a second. Now that the skin is pushed in place underneath these major carnacles, I like to take a pin pusher and a 1-inch pin, and I'm going to put this directly in the center. I'm not even going to worry about pinning the skin on either side of these carnacles. I have my silicone caulking in there to hold that in place. Because we're very careful during the flushing process, this skin is very thin and it's not going to move when it dries. It's just like mounting a deer. The thinner the skin, the less distortion you have during the drying process. Just find my center point, and I'm just going to push this through the skin into the foam neck area of the head. See how I came up underneath and I didn't scratch any of the paint. Now we're going to hinge the head forward. That's going to allow us to inject a little bit of caulking behind it and tuck in the skin on the back side of the head. So I put one hand on the major carnacles and one hand on the top of the head. Just bend it forward enough so that we can work. Okay, I push the skin back, and you can't see this on the video, but you can see a pocket in there. And that's where we're going to be putting a little bit of our silicone caulking. Just going to use this. You could use our other syringe thing for this. That would work fine. I'm going to use this. We're putting it directly behind the neck. This is just to help hold it in place. Okay. It's not necessary to put any caulking on the back of these feathers right here. That's going to be folded back against the pan of feathers directly behind the head. We don't need to control those feathers at all. Okay, so I'm going to grab onto the back part of our neck feathers now. I'm just going to pull them up slightly. What that's doing is actually pulling that skin up under the head and finishing off. That's why I didn't pin underneath those carnacles either. It gives me a little bit more working room. Then I'm going to grab these pan of feathers about midway, and I'm just going to step them forward a little bit. And they're floating on caulking right now, so they step forward easily. And that allows me to have a nice clean tuck-in area behind the head. The next step is to tuck our skin in behind the head. And I like to start by getting it roughly in position on both sides, making sure I have plenty of skin on both sides to work with. And you want to make sure that your skin is not folded over and that you don't have feathers caught in here. I do that from both sides to start. I start by tucking it in underneath the V-notch on the head. Then I just work my way down. This is why we kept those feathers so moist during the whole process. If we didn't, we wouldn't have this control here. And repeat the process on the other side. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm doing the same thing I just did on that side. Now that we have the skin all tucked into place, I'm using my pin pusher and a 1-inch pin, and we're just going to put 2 or 3 of those in right at the V-notch and 2 or 3 down the side just to help hold that skin in place. You want to make sure you're not catching any of the feathers in there as you're doing this. That's all that's to that. We'll grab our grooming tool. This is the small grooming tweezers. I'm just going to start to groom this area a little bit before I fold that head back into it. It's easier to do it right now. And I do that on both sides. Now we're ready to fold the head back into the pan of feathers. I grab right onto the center. I put one hand underneath the turkey to give it a little bit of support. Just fold them back into place. I bring that pan of feathers up to see if I like my position. I'm pretty happy with that. That matches our reference photo. On our reference photo, we've been using the head is not tipped way back in. We could do that if we wanted to. But at this point, we're going to keep it right here. But we do need to lock it in place now so it's not moving around as we work on the rest of the bird. So make sure it's lined up correctly with the center of our tail. Moving forward, I want you just to see that alignment, what it's looking like. And we're going to put our eye pin in right here through the neck foam into the form to hold it in place. Again, I got one hand on the head when I do this, making sure I'm not distorting any feathers as I push that eye pin in. And that's all that's to it. Now that we have that set, we can concentrate on getting our breast feathers groomed into place. Because we use latex here, we have plenty of time to do this. We could even do the rest of the injection on the bird and come back to it. But I like to get one area done and then move forward. The only silicone we've used so far is just to hold the head in and a little bit on these feathers here, the cape feathers directly behind the head. And they're not going anywhere. We don't have to worry about that. The first place I like to start with my grooming is on the cape feathers directly around the head. I'm just lining these up right here. Sure they're falling nicely and they look good. You can kind of bring them down from the center if you need to. Now that we have our cape of feathers directly behind the head where we want them grooming wise, I'm going to put the beard in place. I like to do this now before I do any more grooming on the breast feathers. If we do it after, you'll misalign some of these breast feathers. You'll have to just redo it. So you might as well do it now. I'm using an eye pin for that, or an upholstery pin. Going to run that directly through the beard. Push it through. I'm going to find the position I want. If you look at our reference picture, you'll see it looks very similar to this. Again, notice how our beard is not too close to our head. This is very important. That's what can separate a good mount from a great mount. Those littlest things like that. Anatomically, when a bird is strutting, there's always about 4 inches of space between the major carnacle on the head and the beard. So once we get the rough position we want, taking my lineman's pliers, and I'm just going to start to pound that eye pin in place. We're going into Bondo and then into the form. After I get it in, then I check my alignment. I stand back, make sure everything is in the correct position, and it is in this case. Now we're going to take some masking tape, a piece about this big. I want to touch quickly on the masking tape as long as we're here. We'll touch on this again. I get this from Uline Shipping Supplies. This particular kind of masking tape does not leave a residue on the feathers after the bird is, and while the bird is drying. Some masking tapes will leave a residue. If you buy this kind, you don't have to worry about that. If I take a piece here, that's about 6 inches. I put it over the top of my eye pin. I start to close it on the beard, and as I close it, I'm just spreading the beard out a little bit, make it look a little bit bigger from the side profile, and that's what people like to see. And then again, I make sure I'm lined up correctly with the head and to the center of the tail. Stand back 4 to 5 feet and just make sure your alignment is correct, which it is. You could, if you wanted to, you could bring the beard up a little bit more like that. That's just, it's a preference. I like to have my beards hanging down a little bit more. Depends on how much you want to show it off. For the sake of the video, I'm going to bring it up slightly. We'll leave it right like that. Now we're going to start grooming on the breast feathers and on the neck area of the turkey. I like to start up here and work my way down. I'm going to start at the center of the bird at the neck area and do this whole breast feather area first. Again, what we're doing here is we're just aligning the feathers. I use my left hand to help push them into place, and I'm using the tweezers on my right hand to pull them out if they're locked underneath. Quite often, feathers like this from the drying process and tumbling process can get pushed underneath each other and get caught. So you have to make sure that they're not caught and that they're lining up. See this black areas here? We need to get rid of those. We're just going to pull our feathers up and into place. Again, I use my left hand as a guide as I'm doing this. We're continuing the grooming process. We have this area basically groomed into shape. It's going to need some more touch up as we're moving forward. It had some missing feathers here and some broken feathers. Remember, we did touch on that. This is the better side of the two. You're always going to have a little bit of that to deal with. We're moving down now on the breast feathers. And as you move down, you'll see that they start to develop this black line on the end of their breast feather. You want to try to align that with the next feather as you're moving along. That's kind of like a reference point. So you can see these two are aligned together. That's what you want to do. Again, this one is missing some feathers, so it's not going to be exact. And I am going to show you how to shingle on this side of the bird, shingle the breast feathers after it's completely mounted. I wouldn't recommend shingling on a bird like this that has too much damage. It's going to look nice as a smooth-breasted strutting bird. And they do have smooth breasts when they're strutting. They don't always have to be shingled. Okay, we have this side of the breast all groomed out. We'll have to do a little bit more touch-up work. We did have a few areas where it has some missing and broken feathers. We weren't able to groom 100% accurately and correctly yet. We'll keep working at that. But this is an acceptable grooming job for this breast feather. This is the good side. This side has got some more issues, as you can see. Broken feathers, missing feathers. I'm going to go ahead and get this side groomed up now off camera, and I'll show you how I end up. It's the same procedure as the other side, just lining everything up the best you can and dealing with the damage. We have the damaged side of the breast feathers groomed up as best as we can for right now. We can continue to come back and do touch-up work on this because we use latex caulking. You can see there's still some areas where there's some missing feathers, some broken out feathers. We can come through after the mount is dried and put a few new feathers in if we feel we need to. Normally in a case like this, because I have one side that's really nice, I would just leave this side as it is and have this towards a wall, or maybe divert people's attention away from this with a little bit of habitat. This is acceptable because the other side is really good. If it's a very damaged cape and it seems like you're just not getting where you want, before you go through any of this, you might want to consider just replacing the cape with a new one of a better turkey. But for right now, we're going to keep it like this and move on to the rest of the bird.